This week, Ducati announced a major update to their flagship sports bike, the Panigale V4, and I was lucky enough last night to go to their pre-British MotoGP dinner to see the new bike there in the flesh. So having had a good chance to have a good look around it, here are the 11 key things that you need to know. Now, number one, I think the biggest, most controversial change has to be the swing arm, which is part of an overall chassis redesign intended to optimize the amount of flex. Basically, what they were saying in the presentation last night is that when the bike's fully banked over at angles of up to 60 degrees, the suspension becomes a lot less effective at ironing out bumps in the road surface, and so it's harder for it to maintain grip. With this new aluminium front frame though, they say there's 40% less lateral rigidity and the swing arm gives 37% less, and so the result is more grip at those higher lean angles whilst maintaining enough longitudinal rigidity to handle the heavy forces of acceleration and braking. Now look, on the one hand, I can see why people might be a bit disappointed about it because it doesn't quite look as exotic and Ducati as the previous generation. But on the other, Ducati have shown in the past, like with the latest Monster for example, where they got rid of the steel trellis frame, that they're not afraid of getting rid of some of these aesthetic signature design features in the name of improving performance. And so really it comes down to what you're buying the bike for. If you just want something for the looks, you could argue this is a bit of a compromise, but if you just want the fastest bike possible, then it has to go in the plus column. Although I will say, admittedly, it would have been nice if they could have done both. Next up though, we've got the Desmo Sodici Stradale V4 engine, which has gone through quite a few changes in this new model. So in Ducati's own words, there are cams with a different profile and a higher lift value. The alternator and oil pump are the same as the ones mounted in the Panigale V4R, while the gearbox drum is the one used in the Superleggera V4, and also the variable length intake horns have greater excursion. The result though, well, it gets 216 horsepower peak at 13,500 RPM, and that's as opposed to the previous gen getting 215.5 at 13,000 RPM. So yeah, half a horsepower more, but you do have to rev it 500 RPM higher. I should also point out as well from the spec sheet that there's a little bit less torque, so 121 Newton meters at 11,250 RPM, and that's as opposed to the 123.5 Newton meters, so that's 2.5 less, and also quite a bit lower at 9,500 RPM. Really, it seems like they've had to compromise quite a bit here when it comes to emissions regulations to make this bike compliant with the latest round called Euro 5B or Euro 5 Plus. I will say though, there are quite a few exhaust accessory options in their catalogue, all of which I think it's fair to say look quite a bit better than the stock silencer. And I believe with the most free-flowing track-only Akropovich full race system, that peak power figure goes up to a massive 228 horses, which is pretty mind-bending, as is the price at over 7.5 grand, so you can basically buy yourself a second bike with that. So yeah, engine output isn't vastly different to the previous generation, if possibly slightly worse, so into that torque figure, but Ducati do claim that they've gone on a weight-saving mission in order to increase the overall power-to-weight ratio. So in the press release, they mentioned 2.7 kilograms off the swing arm and almost another kilogram off that new front frame. So in total, they're now saying the V4S model is 187 kilograms wet but without fuel, which is quite a peculiar way of measuring it, but I guess we can work out that with 17 liters of a full tank, you're looking at just shy of 200 kilograms. So they're saying in the press release that this means the bike is a couple of kilograms less than the previous generation, but I'm kind of struggling with it because I can't find a like-for-like comparison of the weights. It feels like manufacturers, and it's not just Ducati, are always chopping and changing between dry weights without fuel, wet weight with 90% fuel, in order to make it difficult to see how the weight's changing from model to model. I did find a press release for the previous gen 2022 Panigale V4S on the Ducati media portal, and it said that it weighs 195.5 kilograms fully fueled up. So that would make this new one a few kilograms heavier. It's all a bit contradictory and hard to figure out, but basically it's in the same ballpark. And I should also point out you've got a standard V4 model as opposed to this V4S, which comes in a little heavier at 191 kilograms wet without fuel. And so that makes it about 4 kilos more. And that's owing to the fact that it gets a lead battery as opposed to a lithium battery in the V4S. And it's got cast aluminium wheels as opposed to forged. Now, another key difference between the two bikes is the suspension. So the base standard Panigale V4 gets a Showa fork, a Sachs monoshock, and a Sachs steering damper. Whereas the V4S gets the latest and greatest from Öhlins with their electronically adjustable smart E3C system on all 3 pieces of hardware. Now, apparently this upgrade to the Öhlins system features a greater range of adjustability, so that should give you a slightly more comfortable ride on the road, as well as the ability to more comfortably ride the curbs on the track. And they also say they've increased the speed of the hydraulic valves for a more precise response to changing riding conditions. Also on the chassis components, there are now new brake calipers from Brembo called the High Pure, and I believe this is the first time they've ever been used on any bike. Now again, there's a little bit of weight loss, so 60 grams per pair, but also better heat dissipation, which is said to lead to more consistent performance under heavy use. Now, these new calipers are also combined with a new ABS system from Bosch called ECBS, and the general idea of this is that it's like a linked braking system that can operate the rear brake on your behalf in order to simulate some of the more advanced techniques used by pro riders on the track. Now, not only do they say that this should lead to better, improved, shorter stopping distances, but also do stuff like automatically trail the rear brake when you've released the front brake lever, as a racer might do with their own thumb brake when they're sort of tipping into a turn. And look, that's just one part of a fairly substantial overhaul to the electronics here, with a new system employed called DVO, or Ducati Vehicle Observer, which they say was developed from their MotoGP program. Effectively, it simulates input from over 70 sensors to give a total picture of the bike's behavior, leading to better performance from the rider aids, which, as you might expect, are fairly comprehensive. So there's Ducati traction control with DVO, Ducati slide control, Ducati wheelie control with DVO, Ducati power launch, which is their launch control that also employs the DVO, engine braking control, and Ducati quick shift 2.0. And that's of course on top of that more advanced ABS system that we just mentioned. Now, all of these rider aids can be managed and observed through the new TFT display, which it has to be said is really rather large, with a super wide aspect ratio of 16:9 that seems to make as much use of the space in the cockpit as possible. They say that you've got so much screen space now, basically, that they can add quite a lot more information. And so when you've got it in the track layout, you can show stuff like G-forces or the percentage of power and torque you're using, or lean angles and things like that, as well as with the GPS built in, lap times and splits. So if you're purely using this bike for the track, there's really a lot of stuff now you can get stuck into with this new TFT display. Thing is though, even if you buy it as a road bike, which, is probably a bit overqualified for the commute, but the road-focused layouts still take advantage of all that screen space by using it to show stuff like navigation or connectivity or some of the menus and settings. Largely though, it does feel like this bike was designed predominantly with the track in mind, and so you've also got a new data analysis system developed in partnership with 2D that can plot all of the relevant parameters from the CAN bus against the GPS data to give you all the data you'll need to really precisely analyze your laps in search of some extra performance. Now, ergonomically, there are quite a few tweaks as well, so there's more freedom to move around for the rider with more longitudinal space behind the tank, as well as a deeper recess in the tank to allow the rider to get into more of an aerodynamic tuck without the chin of the helmet sort of touching the top of the tank there. On top of that, they say they've also changed the shape of the tank to give more support under braking and cornering, and the foot pegs have actually been moved 10mm narrower, not only to improve ground clearance, which will give you greater lean angles, but also to keep the rider more aerodynamic. And that leads me on to another area in which this bike has apparently been improved, with 4% less wind resistance from the updated fairing, along with better wind protection on the straights, which is said to keep the rider in a calmer bubble. And there are a lot of things here which they say help to make this bike feel more manageable and usable by riders of a wider range of abilities. Also, I'm sure you'll have noticed the aero winglets on the front of the bike there. They're said to generate as much downforce as the previous generation, yet they look a bit more integrated into the fairing, and I think it also helps that they're painted the same red as well. And then another tweak we should mention is the fact that the leading edge of the fairing is a little further back from the front wheel, which apparently helps with quicker changes in direction, especially at higher speeds. And lastly, on the aero, they've even gone so far as to redesign the front mudguard to optimize the airflow coming off it, pushing more into the radiator, which of course is going to in turn improve cooling. So yeah, lots of aero tweaks, but the knock-on effect is it's had quite a substantial impact on the looks of the bike. And I think it's fair to say the reaction has been a little bit mixed online, especially combined with that new double-sided swing arm. Although to be fair, in my experience of doing these videos for quite a few years now, the reaction normally is quite mixed when you update a flagship model like this. I will say though, when the pictures of this bike first popped up on my phone when it was very first announced, I probably wasn't completely sold straight away, but seeing it in the flesh last night at the MotoGP dinner, I do think it looks quite a lot better, and even things like the swing arm look nicely designed and have this sort of Ducati quality to them. So yeah, definitely get down the dealer and have a look if you're not entirely sold. And the inspiration, they say, for this new styling package is partly from the 916 with some of the flatter, more horizontal lines and also some references in the lighting. But also you can see with the winglets, the slightly steeper angle on the windscreen there, and again that bigger gap behind the front wheel, that MotoGP is starting to have quite a significant effect on the aesthetics of sports bikes for the road. So yeah, I'm a little bit late with this video because I was on holiday last week when it was first announced, but what I'd love to know from you is whether in that period of time you've had a chance to get used to it and it's grown on you, or do you still think the previous gen Panigale V4 is better looking? So let me know down in the comments. One thing you can't really debate though is how much more expensive it's got. The base Panigale V4 is now £24,395 and the S model a massive £29,995. So I think that's about £4,000 up on the previous gens of each of these bikes, which is pretty mind-blowing. I think it puts at least the S model very firmly in the dream garage category if it wasn't already for most people. So yeah, as always, I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments below and some of the tweaks they've made. I'll also put on the screen now our pick of some of the other best new sports bikes for 2024, so you can give that a watch if you haven't already. Hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.